Hello, dear listeners, and welcome to the latest edition of One Nation Under Whisky. I am Jason Neil Patrick Harris Johnston Yellen, coming to you from the warehouse, Rickhouse, barrel house, cask house at Westland. I'm in the Skagit Valley with Shane. Shane, this is the worst intro. What's your second name?
Oh, Shane Showtime Armstrong.
Shane Showtime Armstrong is with us today. This is exactly what I'm here for. So, Shane, you and I are in the, do you call it a barrel house, warehouse, rick house, cask house?
We call it a rack house.
A rack house.
Simple.
So thank you for having me in the rack house today.
Yeah, happy to have you.
We've been popping some bungs, we're exploring some flavors, and we're going to have a little chat here about one that we quite liked along the way, and there's some interesting aspects of this to discuss. Do you want to go ahead and pour right now?
Yeah, let's do it. You're saying popping bungs, which made me think of an expression that Jeff, who works here at the rack house, are working on, which is saying that things in life are landing bung up. If you roll a barrel, it ends bung up. This is a good thing.
I like that.
Hey, how you doing, bud? And it's like, no, things are going bung up. Things are going good. Thinking about working it into the lexicon.
Wow, bungs up. It's a bit like bottoms up, I suppose.
Yeah, something like that. I guess it could be bungs down or bungs askew.
Bungs askew. Don't even know what to do with that. So as we were going through the Rickhouse, keeping it simple, thank you, sir, we were having a little chat along the way about representational Westland. And in some regards, there's looking for the next latest and greatest. And for you as the chap who does a lot of work with the blending, and you and I have a follow-up conversation about the blending side of things. For you as you explore this Rickhouse, what are the casks saying to you? What are you searching for when you're amongst the casks?
Yeah, I mean, we have a lot going on. I mean, talk about foundational aspects of Westland. Like, the very basis of Westland is somewhat radical in the whiskey world. I mean, we're using these malts that are roasted and kilned to different levels, developing flavor. We're using a Saison-style brewer's yeast, again, developing flavor more. And that's all largely going into new oak casks, which is pretty unique within the single malt world. So our base level is pretty radical, pretty out there. So like that's where we're starting, and then from that we're branching into all these different casks. So we have this base spirit type, it's going into these wildly different casks, and you can come up with different combinations, like build upon each other, build upon that base, so the spirit can shine through, but also the secondary maturation or the finish, whatever you want to call it, also shines through. So they're battling each other, and this is what I like about single cask selection that starts with 5 malt, is that it has this competing force of the initial spirit and cask and then the new cask that it goes into. Okay.
Competing force and then new cask. We were then walking around today and seeing things that were a so-called finish for 7 years, 8 years. Is that, obviously it's purposeful on some level, but what's the idea with a 3 year in an original cask and then a 7 or 8 years in a secondary cask? Was there a goal there for flavor building, for flavor management?
Some of it's circumstance and some of it's just, we're always doing a lot. We're always trying a lot of different combinations, and it's nice to get, the secondary influence of a cask, but also get maturation at the same time, and it integrates the notes really well. Like, I'd be lying if I said that every one that was calculated that has hit 7 years of so-called finishing, like, wasn't also good at 3 years of finishing.
Sure,
it's just some of it's circumstantial, but it's worked out really well. Those two things developing at the same time, the maturity and the extraction from the new cask.
So talk to us about what we've got in our glass here.
Yeah, right here is a nice one. So it started as 5 malt in a new oak cask, specifically Cooper Select, which is our new American oak. Stays were air dried 18 months. It's got lighter toast, heavier char,
Okay, lighter toast, heavier char.
Yeah,
Thank
so
you.
more like a standard bourbon treatment. So it stayed in that cask for a bit. So stayed in that cask for about 3 years or so. And then it spent 7 years in a second fill Oloroso hogshead.
Okay.
So you get that debate of like, you know, what's this concept of finishing? Brooklotti calls it acing.
Yes.
So additional cask enhancement. I believe the E is enhancement.
Do you know I've heard it as evolution
As
as
evolution?
well? But I've heard both. I've heard both E's.
Yeah.
In one interview, I saw Mark Renier use the E 2 different ways, for enhancement and for evolution.
I guess that's interesting. It's like a philosophical debate. It's like, is an evolution an enhancement? I guess. Depends on the context.
Simmer down, Showtime, simmer down.
Yeah. But anyway, so this one
Okay, so second fill use on this one you just said.
is something that, like, I mean, I think it's a great combination because you're getting the base spirit, 5 malt new oak, obviously really nice and malty, got those chocolate notes from the malt, but also the dark chocolate, more bitter notes from the cask. And then you have Oloroso not coming in and washing it out, like sometimes a first fill.
Is this a delivery truck going behind us? Is that
This is a trash truck.
trash truck? It's trash day, that's fine.
Yeah.
These
These
are
are the-
high quality mics, it's not picking up any of it.
Yeah, this is the ambiance of the Rickhouse. But anyways, the second fill, it doesn't wash it out. It integrates really well, so they're operating on somewhat of an even playing field. So you get that Westland, like, house style.
Yeah.
Which I would define
Yeah.
by the 5 malt new oak. I mean, we do many other spirit types, but this is what I would define by what is the house style if I had to pick one.
Well, and still for second fill, the oils on the glass are remarkable. You know, those are some nice, thick, oily legs running down the bowl of the Glencairn. Colour? This is always for Jess. Jess loves the colour portion of any tasting. What colour would you describe that as, Showtime?
Yeah, color, maybe like a light maple syrup.
Oh, beautiful. Oh, that's pro.
That's pro. I mean,
Yeah, I
color
like
is
that a lot. Light
color-
maple syrup.
Yeah, I mean, color is a mysterious thing. Obviously, in whiskey, like, we don't add any coloring to it, so you can tell a lot. Especially since we started new oak, like, with a fair amount of our spirit, we get a really nice color that gives a good depth to it. And obviously, color plays a role in how you taste and how you experience it.
Checks out.
I mean, it's going to be very different if you close your eyes and take a sip, or you have a glass where you can't see the color. So it's interesting, the role of color and taste.
Yeah. No, well, Josh and I say it all the time. We're not colour guys, but you can't help but think something nice, dark, light maple syrup colour isn't going to be delicious.
Yeah. Whether it's influencing you or not, it can go different ways. Like, we mentioned this earlier, but you can have a PX cask that's really pale, but then it surprises you on the nose by being this big, fruity, developed character. And I think that's fun, like a little bit of dissonance makes it intriguing.
Interesting. So on the nose, I'm getting a leading little bit of cinnamon here. I think when we were tasting this with our good friend Anna earlier, we were talking baking spices happening here. For you, popping your nose, and obviously we are doing this in the Rickhouse. It is a chilly day at the end of April. We're not in our home labs or home offices. But what do you get as we sit here of this moment?
Yeah, like the tasting context is way off from normal. Also, the tasting context of purely like having it in front of me and speaking about it is very different from my normal environment of tasting it. But this one, I'm getting like a dates thing,
checks out.
especially on the nose,
Yep.
which I like a lot. I mean, Oloroso can be sneaky. It can do a lot of things with that oxidized character. It's got like sort of like a dry apple chip thing, the date thing going on.
I totally agree with that. Do you get any of this, a suggestion of the cinnamon happening there? Do you get a little bit of the
Yeah, I get a bit. It's kind of inherent.
clove or the allspice?
Yeah, the clove is definitely there, and that's like brought largely from the new oak.
That
comes
checks
across,
out,
that
yeah.
carries through and shines, even with the light coating of Oloroso, not over the top.
Who's the Oloroso producer for you on these ones? Do you, if you know?
Yeah, so we don't know the producer. We got the cast from Tonnereal del Sur, I do not know the original bodega of this one.
That texture on the palate, you were saying this as we were walking through the Rickhouse today. If you wanted to just isolate texture, you would come and do it in these types of conditions. What's that about? Is that just the cold, or you're just finding, given that the palate and the nose are quieter, the senses react to the texture more?
Exactly. Like in the Rickhouse, my nose is so muted, twofold, because the temperature in here and all the casks are right next to you. And we're just standing there, so I'm not getting a ton on the nose. So therefore, you get it on the palate, and you're like, this is the most experiential of any of the things.
Yeah, that checks out.
It's like, and it plays a huge role. Like, texture is a huge part of tasting for me. Like, if the texture falls apart, everything else can fall in line. You can have like perfect nose, like the actual notes on the palate, like sweet, sour, bitter, salty, umami, can be all dialed in. But if the texture's not there, like, you're gone. It all falls apart. So it's certainly something telling. If you come in, you taste it in the Rickhouse, and you get a good palate texture, like it's something you can build on.
Jason and Joshua could not agree more on that texture side, the carry of flavour, just the experience itself. It's richer. If you're chewing it in the mouth, it feels like you're getting more bang for your buck. Is that palate continuing? And again, I know we're a little chilly here, but are you generally getting the palate following on from the nose here? Is it telling a consistent tale, or are there some surprises in there?
I mean, so this has a nice arc to it. It's like you have the fruit notes that are developed during fermentation, which are the brighter ones, sort of on the cherry side. Then you have the complementary fruit notes from the Oloroso, like I said, are more on the dried spectrum. So you got your apple, you got your dates. But then once it hits the palate, so you get some classic notes, just your, obviously you have bitter receptors on your tongue. So those give it a little bit of spike, especially on this one. And that complements it, and it takes it into this, dark chocolate world, which I think accelerates. I talked about this kind of a lot, maybe more to myself than anyone else, but about palate acceleration.
Go on.
It has to get the palate, and if the nose is up high and doing a lot, the palate has to do even more and take you to a next tier. So there's plenty of times when you're doing tastings and the nose is really, really dialed in, but if the palate drops off quickly, then it's nothing.
Yeah. Yeah, sure.
If that relationship's not there, if it slopes a little bit, but then you can do the reverse and it can work out really well. The nose could be muted, and so the palate doesn't have to accelerate quite as fast. And so it's this relationship.
So for you as blender around these parts, we'll get into that further in a later episode or portion of this episode. When you're sampling through here, are you thinking, if it had a quieter nose but a boisterous palate, that would be a blending component? Or are you even saying for a single cask, you could have a slow start and then a palate that rises to the occasion?
Exactly. I'm saying that could be a single cask.
That's wild, man.
The priority is the relationship. It's
where
the nose starts and where the palate begins.
In single cask form?
In single cask form, for sure.
Okay.
Yeah. Because it has to it's a little bit about holding your attention. I can hold your attention in a fair amount of ways. It can be unique, which can be fleeting because it can only hold your attention for a minute, but then it ends up being, not sustainable. It doesn't sustain that uniqueness.
Sure.
It's not quite there. But it can start very sort of placid in there. But if the palate hits and gives you some notes you weren't expecting and accelerates enough, it can definitely be a single cask.
Whereas if the nose takes off like a rocket, but the palate isn't there, then you've got a wasted experience?
Exactly. It's not a complete experience.
Gotcha.
Have,
that's interesting.
A good relationship.
I like that. I'll think about that more. Okay.
Yeah, a lot of what, me and Matt used to discuss this a fair amount, but it's defining what a good whiskey is without saying tasting notes or anything specific. You know what I mean? Because that's not what defines a good whiskey. And I'm not a huge fan of very specific tasting notes. I use them to, get my mind turning and wrapping around things, but I don't I think that's the only use for them. Like when you're blending or you're tasting single cask, it's all about relationships, between the nose and the palate, or the two notes, and how it sets up your expectations.
Okay. Man, you're so cerebral.
Listen, I try not to think most of the time.
What happened to Shane Cerebral Armstrong?
Oh, yeah.
All this Showtime. You misled us. It was cerebral the whole time. So then for me, the finish here moves into that kind of roasted coffee bean kind of place. This to me is really quintessential Westland. If I wanted to give somebody a representation of what I've understood as Westland over the last dozen years, I would pour them this. We've talked a little bit, and again, we're back in the single cask realm. Is that doing enough as a single cask? Are people looking for more off-piste offerings on single casks? What's your experience there?
Yeah, I think what you're getting at is like, it's sort of a philosophical thing with me, is like, sometimes single cask, people want single casks on paper. It's like, oh, this is a unique cask. Oh, I've never heard of this. Like, oh, that I want that. But like, I'm into the backbone of what makes Westland, which can be this character with a slight influence by the secondary cask. So you'll be like, oh, what's this unique thing? What's this unique thing? I'm like, well, try this. Like, it's been in many different blends. It's 5 malt new oak. This one in particular is a little over 10 years old, so that's a little special. But something that's the backbone doesn't mean it can't be a single cask.
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
It's like, I said this earlier, but it's like, don't read the notes before you taste it. Like, I don't want to know a ton about it before I taste it. And I want to make a decision in isolation. I realize that, maybe that doesn't grab people quite as much as a unique sounding cask or a unique wood type. But as far as a tasting experience, it's hard to beat.
Well, and to that very point, do you find a difference, or even how much of a difference do you find between chap roaming the Rickhouse, popping bungs, tasting casks, and a retail team out in front of a consumer or a store owner? Do you think you get away with things in the Rickhouse that you don't get away with in the retail realm?
As far as something that would be like something that shows up in our core range.
Exactly. Exactly. Where you're over here in the Rickhouse saying, but this is quintessential Westland, and someone at retail is saying, but give us a unique cask so we can tell a fresh story, a new story, a head-turning story to the consumer.
Yeah, it's always easier here in the Rickhouse. There's a lot of romance to it. It has the ambient smell sort of takes you somewhere.
Yeah.
And you can focus on it. A lot of times, in the retail space, when they're tasting it, they're at work behind their desk, like you're often tasting in these little heinous plastic cups that I mentioned earlier, like probably the worst tasting vessel imaginable.
Just pour it in people's hands, we'd be better off.
Yeah, exactly. I'm just gonna cast it off into the air and hope someone makes it into your mouth.
A spray bottle.
Yeah, exactly. So it's I understand in their context, people want to hear a particular word that maybe they haven't heard before, or a wine style they haven't heard, or a wood type they've never heard of before. Yeah. And we have unique wood type. We have Garryhana. That's a very unique story. That's an easy one to tell because it's so unique. It's really good, and it speaks to where we are in this world. But I understand. I understand that words play a big role in tasting. Just like color plays a big role in tasting, words also play a big role. So
before I commit the cardinal sin of having us move over to something slightly more esoteric, you mentioned a second ago, this is over 10 years old. And we kind of buried the lead on what age are we at on this second fill Oloroso finish?
Yeah, so this is at 10 years old, full term, or its total age is 10 years old. It's been finishing for over 7 years. I'll keep saying that, finishing, just because it's the word we use.
But is this 2015 distillate? did this complete its full journey through the end of 2024 as 2014 distillate, and it'll have a birthday this year?
No, it's already 10 years old.
Already 10.
Yeah. So
already 10 in 2025.
Yeah, so
there you go.
Yeah.
So
it's
2015.
10.3 years old.
Gotcha. Is there 10-year-old Westland on the market currently?
Not right now, but
Okay.
Stay tuned. Well, stay dialed into Westland. Whoever's listening to this.
Well, thank you for this taste. This has been exquisite. Now let's transition over.
5 minutes later.
So while Shane finishes up the pouring here, we were in the Rickhouse. I don't want to say we were climbing over Cask, because I definitely was not. My 2 feet were safely on terra firma. But we were drilling, we were pouring. We have not tasted these to this point. They came from the sheet, they looked interesting, to the point you were just making a second ago, Shane. It's peated in X rum. Like, that sounds good on paper. And so what do we have going on with the 2 samples that we have in front of us?
Yeah, right in front of us, both of them are heavily peated malt from Baird's Malting.
Okay.
Peated spec is 55 ppm, so heavily peated.
Wow.
This is a spirit we no longer make. So we originally made it because, peat is a foundational part of single malt.
Sure.
So we wanted to integrate something of the past into what we were doing as we were developing our local peat line. So we have a fair amount of this spirit. These 2 samples in particular, one of them started in ex-bourbon, one of them started in First Fill Cooper Select, which is that new American oak with the lighter toast, heavier char.
Okay.
They are exactly the same age. They're exactly 9.6 years old. They have spent 6.1 years in a rum cask, specifically a Mount Gay rum cask.
Okay, awesome.
Which we got them by doing a little bit of a trade between Mount Gay and Westland. So we sent them sort of an odd number. We sent them 66 casks, and they sent us 66 casks. So Trudy Ann, who's the master blender at Mount Gay, she's great. I see her once every 2 years. It's always very nice to hang out with her, and she does a great job at Mount Gay.
Okay.
It's a good
So
barrel swap.
And so for the listener, Mount Gay is in the Remy portfolio, along with Brooklady and Westland, and other things, obviously, but for the purposes of this conversation. So that makes it easy to send things back and forth. So then 3 years in their respective woods, and then 6 years in their rums, in their Mount Gay rum.
Yes, I think we'll start out with the bourbon one. I think it makes sense. The one that started in the First Fill ex-bourbon.
Oh my gosh, you give Jason peated, he's a happy camper.
Yeah, it's hard. It's hard to beat, It's hard to beat for sure.
So yeah, color from here, your light maple syrup on our first offering was so beautiful, Shane. What would you say on this?
I mean, this is closer to your classic straw.
Yeah, you go.
That's.
If I was scoring at home, I would go reflective gold on this.
Reflective gold.
Reflective gold.
Like a gold that thinks about being gold.
You're so good. You're such a pleasure to spend time with. That's perfect.
Yeah, this one's really like you say, it's hard to beat. This is like, there's these realms of what peat can be. I think in my mind, there's your classic woody peat. I'm talking about within our context. Your classic woody peat. Then you can have your fruity peat, and I think this is waxy peat.
Oh, interesting.
Where that folds. Well, wax as in candle wax.
Yeah.
Floral.
So for me, wax is often a spirit-driven note. So are you saying peated spirit can have a waxiness to it?
Yeah, I think it's within our stocks. For some reason, I feel like it goes in these 3 directions. You can have your straightforward sort of campfire woody peat, which I don't think this one is.
Okay.
Then you have your fruit, which sometimes that's developed during fermentation, further developed.
Yes, sir.
In the still, and so there's a relationship there where I think it's not quite woody, and there's more of this fruit peat thing, which tends to happen in the younger peat that we have. So if it's around 2 years old or something like that, that's more sustained. But then this one, which I really enjoy, is the waxy candle thing going on.
No, that's nicely stated. I'm almost getting a little barnyardy on the nose.
Positive or negative barnyard?
Always positive.
Yeah.
Always. But sometimes I'll have a difference between horse feed bag and horse stable. And again, both are good. Sometimes it's leather saddle, right? This to me is horse stable.
Yeah, but your favorite horse stable?
Of course. Knowing the peated spirit the way you do, what do you find the rum bringing to this? What's the delivery point for the rum here?
So like all these, I mean, we'll talk about the relationship between these two ones, but the rum impact is always pretty delicate. Like it just elevates it in this very subtle way. It's hard to not get out of your head like, oh, this like banana, very faint banana note, which exists in our spirit and just like developed a tiny bit more. We're talking about the role of words in tasting, and now I get hung up on these things where it's like, you know, it's not an accident that they're calling it Caribbean cask because you have this association with like fruit in the Caribbean, being in the sun, and like therefore that leads me into like sunscreen and banana and like pineapple. It's like, are these notes? I guess they are because they're experiencing them, but am I just thinking about it because it's rum? So I also like this aspect of it. There is an ambiguity to like the direct impact of it, but you can't argue with the final result. It's like, it's rum finished. Like, oh, is it exactly like some sort of extra coconut note? Or am I just, you know, on the beach?
Yeah, I get it being very grain-led, and I didn't expect that long in rum to have a spirit that is so grain-forward. I'm also having difficulty feeling the tip of my nose right now.
Yeah, it's cold. There's a really nice, for people listening, I have no like visual or temperature. I don't know if that travels through with the new technology. But yeah, we're getting a little bit of a breeze through like the open rack house. There's a red-tailed hawk like flying around, looking for rabbits. It is chilly, right on the tip of your nose. It's hard to get all those notes. I agree, for sure.
That's why I feel so comfortable with the barnyard element of it. I'm like, yeah, my nose has been cold in horse stables previously. I'm familiar with that experience. All right, I'm going to give this a taste. Big, healthy, hearty taste.
This is what Pete does well. It's like continuing the acceleration sort of talk. Pete does a really good job of accelerating and transforming this. Like this is transforming a little bit more in the wood direction. It's like started with like the waxy nose floral, which makes sense for the nose, and then starts leaning into the more burnt wood aspects of it on the palate.
That just keeps coming in wave after wave on the palate. There's no one thing that I'm getting leading the charge. It feels incredibly balanced. There's the wood, there's the sweet fruit, there's still the grain, there's the peat. But holy moly, if all four of those aren't just moving in tandem.
Yeah,
great texture as well.
Yeah, it's got incredible balance to each one of those notes. Well, that's what's fun too. If like they're operating on an even plane, then sometimes they can, each one of those notes, whether it's like driven by the grain cask, ester, fruit notes, or other, which I put peat in that category, sort of an additional note. If those just have a little blip, they can each speak at different times, which I really like.
Turning to the nose, I get that little bit of toasted coconut or a little bit of that sunscreen that you were starting to allude to.
Yeah, yeah. As soon as you say Caribbean, you know, someone's thinking about sunscreen.
Well, you know, skin this color, I got to be thinking about sunblock rather than sunscreen.
Yeah. Oh. Yeah, I got a nice sunburn the other day. And I was like, I'm 38 years old. Like, what am I doing?
I got a sunburn the other day being too close to a light bulb. So that's the lack of pigmentation that I have. Okay, I've got this. I'm still hovering around the first sample, but I've moved on to the second sample. Seems a little darker in color.
Yeah, it's migrated this one. Yeah, so the only difference in the second sample, so it has that heavily peated malt. It had its initial maturation for around 3 years, but it was in a new American oak, specifically Cooper's Select in our rack house. So that color is coming from that cask.
There you go.
We don't add any coloring. All the color that you see is from whatever cask it went into.
Oh, gosh.
Also, these will be different proofs. So we fill the ex-bourbon at 125. We fill the new oak at 110.
Oh, that's wonderful for us and the listener. That's terrific.
It's been aging for 10 years, roughly, or a little bit under 10 years.
Interesting.
So probably gone down. It goes down roughly 1 proof per year in our rack house. So this sample will be hovering around 101.
Okay.
The one we just sampled will be 115 or so.
Interesting.
Like that.
Oh, that's terrific. Thank you.
116.
Thank you, sir.
Which it's kind of an interesting thing with sequence of sampling. Like, normally I'd sample the higher proof second, but since it started in ex-bourbon, I thought this was a more interesting way to taste it sequentially.
And again, to your point, with colour, it seemed natural to me to start with the lighter colour first and then the darker colour, but proof in there, or ABV, was completely reversed. Wonderful. Gosh, there's something new to learn every single day.
Which you'll notice, like the first one, obviously higher proof, so the nose really accessible. That's an advantage of the higher proof.
Yes. And I didn't want to blame the temperature too much for being here, but I was experiencing a quieter nose on sample number 2.
Yeah, for sure. I think we can point to the proof on that.
Yeah, less of the barnyard, less of the peat. Oh man,
that's kind of fun about the peat too, because it can get muted. Mm-hmm. But we'll see where the palate goes, and that's where the whole acceleration thing comes in. It can be kind of tamped down on the nose at times.
Yeah, I'm exploring this idea of yours of a quieter nose that just leads you in, warms you up to bring you to the palate. Okay, I'm going in for the taste, and I'm going to come back to a point you made earlier as well. Once I've had a taste of this. Oh, wow. You'd made a comment earlier about sometimes in shaking up the experience, you would give a very quick nose, if indeed you would ignore the nose. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but you may pick up a sample and go straight to the palate, and then after the palate, go to the nose. Could you talk about that a little bit? Put a few leaves on those branches?
Yeah, so the conversation was about the context of tasting.
Yeah.
And like you fall into these pretty regimented ways of tasting. At least I do. I have my little tasting chamber off of the blending lab. I go in there, sit down, I have my sequence of how I go through things. And the obvious thing, you go straight to the nose, do some notes on it, go to the palate, do some notes on it. But I think it's important to understand other people's contexts are very different than that.
Of course.
And so I have to have an experience where, I'm not prepared for the tasting, and you just pick it up and go straight to the palate, and don't overthink it. Uh-huh. I mean, part of it's just, it's fun to taste in a different way and be like, how am I going to experience this differently in this moment? And the other part of it is, this is how most people are drinking it.
Yeah.
If we're going to be honest.
Yeah.
And so that experience has to be dialed in. The not overthinking it, the just pure taking a sip of it, I think is really important. I'm really going to do it as I walk in the morning. A sample will be sitting there, and I'll do that too. I'll pour it, just quickly get it on the palate, and try not to think about it, and try to move on to another activity quickly and see if it strikes me.
That's wild.
It's pretty important.
I love that.
To me, of like it striking you.
Yeah, stopping you in your tracks almost.
Yeah, it's not, or like, you can carry on, but then you kind of go back to it, and you're like, there's something about it that's making you think, which I think is a big part of our spirit in general. It's like it sort of, it keeps on going, and it makes you think about it, like, oh, what's this note? What's that?
Do you, in your wealth of experience, do you get more wood presence on the second sample than on the first?
Sure. Yeah, for sure. So, I mean, Sitting the palate, and that's a little bit of the acceleration on that one is thanks to the new oak. And there's a pretty magical relationship between peat and new oak. Like that combination is like very cool and hard to beat because it has that too. It has like two factors in it that accelerate it. Like if you use peated spirit in a vatting, like that'll extend the finish, that'll accelerate the finish, even at pretty low levels. So in our flagship release, like we use hovering around 10% peated malt.
Okay.
And that's enough to extend the finish a little bit more, to accelerate it a little bit. And you combine that straightforward with new oak that serves a similar role, and they like compete. They compete as an accelerant. I don't know if that makes any sense, but it's like, I mean, we keep coming back to it, but it's like, it's notes competing for your attention, hold your attention.
Interesting. Yeah, I like that. To go with kind of what we've been talking about in this little segment here, do you see one of these as a more natural single cask than the other? Are they both single casks to your mind? Are they both blending components? What do you think as you experience these side by side?
I think they both can be single casks. If I had to pick, the more striking one in this context, in this moment, it's the first one, because it really did. It grabbed you, and some of that's the proof. The second one could be a single cask. I think it would also serve incredibly well as a blending component. Like you could put this in flagship, and it would be dialed in as a roll. I think if you put the first sample in a vatting, you would take away some of its character.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Agreed.
So if I had to pick one, I'd probably go the first one.
Okay, we are of one mind on this, and perhaps we might need to have a conversation after we hit the stop button here.
Think about it. Consider it.
Dear sir. Paging Anna Hins. This has been tremendous. Thank you so much for having me in the Rickhouse today. We'll continue this conversation back in the lab around blending. So cheers for the moment, Jim.
Yeah, cheers. Appreciate you coming out.
Cheers. Hello again, dear listeners, and welcome to the second part of my conversation with Shane Showtime Armstrong here at Westland. As we found out in part one, he is both cerebral as well as a showman. And in this second part, I'm going to be sitting with Shane in his blending lab at the Westland Distillery on First Avenue in Seattle. Shane, thanks so much for your time again.
Yeah, thanks for coming to hang.
My pleasure. I'm going to start controversial here. When I was setting up this time with you, Anna, our dear friend Anna at Westland, was suggesting your job title is not without controversy. How do you describe your job at Westland?
I mean, my job in a basic way is to decide what casks go into each vatting, what single casks we select in a very basic way. But behind all of that is keeping track of all the casks and projecting out, sometimes up to 10 years at a time, which can be a bit challenging. Within our rack house, we have probably 1,000 unique combinations of spirit type and cask type.
Wow.
So it becomes a lot to keep track of and see what fits where. So it's a lot of time, hunched over, sort of staring at my computer, trying to figure out stuff. And the other time is, mixing different ratios of thing and doing the whole lab.
So does blender, in your own mind, blender's a small corner of what you do, a small pocket of what you do? Is it a 50-50? It sounds like you might be hunching over spreadsheets more than you're hunching over cask samples.
Oh, time-wise, for sure, but you can't have one without the other. So I always want to have a very organized setup and a nice structure that allows sort of the creative part to come in, and it liberates you. So I have to know the barriers of what I'm making before I can even approach it.
Interesting. I remember a very old Bill Parcells quote when I think he was with the Jets, and he had made the comment that coaches should be general managers, because if you were going to cook the meal, you should be out shopping for ingredients. And it sounds like, listening to you, you are the person in charge of the ingredients, and then you are the one doing the cooking of said ingredients. Is that fair? Does that resonate?
Yeah, I mean, Parcells was the coach of the Pats, which I grew up in that area, so it sits right at home with me for sure. Yeah, but exactly, like, I don't know, creativity and all these things is not a do whatever you want. It's to understand the parameters and work within those. Like, you have limitations for each of our releases. Some have much more established structures, like our flagship is a pretty established structure. And then you move on to the higher end ones like Gariana, which its only limitation is that it uses a percentage of these Gary Oak casks, but the rest is a little bit wide open. So that you can play around, but you have that one parameter. We have our Solum, which is our local peat release. Like, that's a tighter parameter. All the spirit is going to be local peat, so you're playing with cask types a little bit more. Yeah, so it's just understanding limitations with that, what goes into a particular vatting, and then also like what you have in stock for next year. Like, do I want a through line from each release? Flagship is pretty tight. And then we'll be talking about our new beer cask finish and our wine cask finish. Those are a little bit less tight than flagship. Those can have more variability. And then as you go up to something like Gariana, it can have even more variability to it.
Perfect. Absolutely perfect. As you're mentioning beer cask here, beer cask finish, Josh and I had the pleasure and the privilege of tasting, I think, the first iteration of that, and loved it. And our comment with Jess, Westland superfan Jess Lomas, all three of us agreed beer cask was insanely crushable. One of the expressions we have around the podcast is open it on a Friday, recycle the bottle on a Monday, hashtag please drink the whole bottle responsibly. And your beer cask absolutely crushed it.
Yeah, I love that. It's because, we talked about in part one, the different parts of tasting, and you can just, before getting on the nose, get it right to the palate, but, digestion is part of it too, and this idea of something being drinkable is an interesting concept with taste, because there could be something that could grab your attention and be super dramatic, but you're not necessarily going to finish it. But to have something like a beer cask that you can go back to is interesting, is compelling, but it's also a whiskey that you're going to finish.
Magnificent. Very quickly, before we move into the meat of today's part, do you feel the pressure of the success of the first iteration? Have you had a second iteration since that first?
Yeah, I've made a second batting.
Okay.
I wouldn't necessarily say I feel the pressure, but when I'm making prototypes and making the next version of it, I'm always tasting the original one. It's always in a group, like I have codes for my prototypes, and it's always coded in a way that I'm tasting next to it. And I always want to tell myself that I want the next version to be better. So when I'm tasting in a lineup, if I have the old one, I want the new version to be better. In a singular moment, and that's enough for me.
I love hearing that you're tasting the previous version while you're then vatting or developing the next version. That's very cool.
Yeah, it's a bit of a trick. It's a bit of a trick to get myself to taste it blind too, because I have these codes and I don't memorize the codes, and they sit on the shelf and marry for a little bit. So then I go through and I don't definitely know, and so I try to make some guesses and how did I define it, and so it's nice. It's nice to be wrong when you go through, and you're like, oh, I think this is it, but it wasn't, and then it makes you rethink it.
That's fascinating. Yeah. Okay. So today we're going to get into how you actually taste through a batch, through a process. One of the first questions is the why of this. As we developed in part one, you're a cerebral chap. What's the why of coming to blending with you? How do you frame yourself? I know you were mentioning Guyana a second ago, and then the freedom you've got in other places. What's guiding you in your mindset as you come to something like Beer Cask?
Yeah, so when I'm approaching this, within all my spreadsheeting, I have a certain amount of casks that I know are going to go towards beer casks. They're defined by that they're finished in a barrel that we loaned out to a local brewery, and they've returned to us, and we've put whiskey back into it. So like that's a parameter that I'm working within.
Okay.
So I have a bunch of casks, and there's a certain age that I'm working with.
Okay.
This one in particular, like the first iteration, the minimum age was 8 years old.
Minimum
was 8 years old. So that was one of our older ones. That's not a strict age.
Yeah.
It could dip probably 5 to 9 is probably the time frame I'm looking at.
Makes sense.
So I understand a lot of casks that I'm working with. And then I'll pull like representative samples of those. So based on spirit, based on age, based on spirit type, and based on cask type. And this includes original cask type too, because these are all these are finishes. So I'll pull representative samples of those, and then within those I'll make what I call sub blends.
Okay.
So I'll pick one parameter. It could be spirit type, let's say, for the beer cask finish, because the first batch was driven by pale malt that started in ex-bourbon and then got finished in beer.
Understood.
But it also has a component that's 5 malt that started in new oak that was then finished in beer casks.
Okay.
So like that's the biggest ratio is pale versus 5 malt. So I'll make some sub blends that are, some pale and some 5 malt. Pale starting in ex-bourbon, 5 malt starting in new oak, and then I'll also do some sub blends of the different beer types or the brewers.
Okay.
So I'm splitting them into components. This is before I haven't tasted any of these things yet. Make these sub blends, and then I'll use those sub blends as building blocks to create prototypes. And I make the first round. I generally make around 6 prototypes.
Okay.
So there'll be various combinations. So if you think about it, if you have like a couple different pale malts, a couple different 5 malts, I can combine, the pale and the 5 malt at a certain ratio, and then I can take another pale, another 5 malt, and combine it at the same ratio and compare those two things that on paper are similar structure, and then see what the differences are.
Okay.
So I can create prototypes from that. I don't know if you follow me.
I do. I'm making sure, because I'm sitting in the lab, I'm looking into your eyeballs, like I'm getting the context here. I'm making sure for our listener, there's that bridge from the representative samples that are then making it into the prototype. So the prototype for you. So how many prototypes might you have?
So the first round of prototypes, I do 6 about.
Okay.
Yeah, so to paint a picture, we're sitting in the lab. It has a little bit of a sterility thing to it. A lot of white tile. There's like lights under the shelves. But every shelf is filled with, a 200 mil. There's some 700 mils kicking around. And so my top shelf is my samples. So I have it labeled beer samples. These are what I was calling representative samples because they represent more than just one cask.
Gotcha.
So I'll pull one and that can be, okay, I know 5 that were filled the same time. The beer casks are from the same brewer. On paper, everything's the same.
Gotcha.
So generally, if I have like 10 that are the same, I'll pull 2 samples or so and consider that.
Okay.
Those, if I combine them, those will represent 10.
With you.
So I have my samples, and then I make my sub blends, which is combining samples that on paper have a similar character. And then I'll take those sub blends and combine them into prototype size, which will represent a full size vatting.
Okay.
And for this beer one in particular, it would be about 50 or so casks.
Gotcha.
They're representing.
Gotcha. Okay.
The whole concept behind this is that it never really sat right with me when you'd see these labs of these blenders and they have I know it's a little bit of a showpiece, but they have hundreds of glasses lined up as if you're cruising through that many samples. And I was like, that's a lot of samples, number one. Number two, I'm a whiskey blender, so I want to know how casks behave when they're mixed together. I'm not going to sample it and be like, oh, this is how it's going to behave when I put it in a vatting.
Gotcha.
So I'd like to have it in a vatting and taste it and then decide what it does, as opposed to vice versa.
Gotcha.
So I get to my prototype phase, and then this is the first time I'm tasting anything. I cruise through those 6 or so samples, and I pick. I'm hoping 6 is a good number. I don't know why I've fallen on it, because I like it, because I feel like in a lineup of 6, you're going to hit something that you like. You're going to learn something.
Okay.
And so I'll have a couple samples that I think pass muster, and then I'll go back and I'll look at what subblends went into them. Oh, they both had this subblend. I liked this character. I'm going to keep that. But then this one had a particular subblend, and I didn't like that character, so I'm going to swap it for the subblend that was in the other prototype.
Okay. Are you doing all this at cask strength? Are you reducing this down to a future bottling strength? Are you doing the old blender trick of taking it down to 20%?
No, I don't do the 20%. I do it at bottle strength generally.
Okay.
So I'll taste some of these ones, like Garyon is an exception where I'll taste it at cask strength and work down. But generally bottle strength, I like to taste it where the consumer is going to taste it.
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense.
And 20% I've tried, because there's all this theoretical stuff, like you're going to get certain notes. But it's always in the back of my head. I'm like, who's drinking it at that percentage? Like, feels outrageous. You know?
I wonder if it's from the old days, a vestige of the old times of, say, a whiskey and soda.
Yeah.
I wonder if it's maybe something like that where the consumer would have been taking it down.
Yeah, that's interesting. But it's like, yeah, you have that soda, you have the carbonation,
right.
You have ice. Like, there's other variables, which I like tasting it in, those different contexts, for sure, and in a cocktail.
Right.
At different times, it's fun to taste.
Okay, so onto that was a big why, and I think that why was starting to lead into the how. And I have to say, and sitting here listening to you, my smile is beaming, because we pride ourselves on being a nerdy podcast. This might be the nerdiest conversation we've had, and I couldn't be happier, and I hope our listeners are feeling the same way. So bridging again over to, how do you now do this? So we're sitting here, I'm looking at some prototypes pulled off the shelf here.
So I have 6 prototypes sitting in front of me. I'm not going to turn through all of them. I'll do a couple. I mean, if people want to sit tight and hear me,
this would be great.
Lather on about it, that's fine. But so I have a grid. I've created a grid, which I'll do my best to describe as I go through. But originally we made a more expansive grid that was based on the sommelier deductive tasting grid, but modified for whiskey, because not everything in wine applies to whiskey. Okay. This is a pretty stripped down version.
Very quickly, what's this sommelier deductive grid?
So the sommelier deductive tasting grid was something that was come up, by the Guild of Master Sommeliers to do exactly what it sounds like, to deduce what a wine is. So you look at the color, you get it on the nose, you get it on the palate, and then from that you're supposed to be able to say like what variety it is, like where it's from, and possibly what vintage. Okay. This is like a very high level tasting. If anyone's ever seen the documentary Somm, I think they've made 3 by now. Yeah. They go through that grid. That's like the blind tasting grid. But it's not always, a lot of them agree to what notes show up in different wines. But it's not this really exact thing. It's kind of like you taste a lot of wines, you go through the grid, you know what you say. Yeah. So then when you taste it blind, you have your own reference point. Okay, that makes sense. So even the other day, you were talking about people who get really particular notes in whiskey. So that's similar to that. They've defined it in their head, a very particular note, so they can call out when they taste it blind really easily. Yes. So it's like that, but applying it to really a large scale and a lot of different things. Gotcha. Okay, yeah, very, very quickly for the listener there, I don't think we put it on wax, but yeah, so I've talked about it before. My buddy Carl, even if I blind pour him Mortlach,
he gets a hair perming solution quality to it. He gets it everywhere. That's always marketing for him. I've got another friend, Kalila, always has a cilantro or a soapy note for him. And again, trying to surprise him. Places I don't get cilantro or soap, I pour him a blind sample. Boom, he gets it. He's right there. It's a Kalila. So for listeners, what's your note? Is there something that always twigs you to a particular distillery? So that's what Shane and I have been discussing previously.
Yeah, it is interesting this day and age that you're recording straight to wax. You'd think you'd do digital.
I don't know if you know this about me, but I like printing. I like saving emails to PDF. And then the joke is they then get laminated and then we read them on the air. So yeah, wax is right in our wheelhouse.
Yeah, it's fun to have it in the lab. But anyways, regardless.
Yes, so you just poured a sample here.
I just poured a little sample. So my little ritual is I pour a little bit of the sample in the glass, and then I coat the glass, pour it out. This is partially if there's something else in the glass, it rinses it. It also has that nice function of coating the upper parts of the glass, so it makes the nose a little bit more accessible, which is how I like to do it. And I open my form, which is creatively titled The Sensory Form.
Oof.
Which gives it sort of a preeminent
there you go.
title. I select, what I'm working on, so I've selected beer cask finish. I've selected that I'm tasting, a vatting of it, a prototype of it. And then I have my blending code. This one in particular is B for beer.
Okay.
3, because this is the third version I'm working on.
Okay.
2 is just to let me know that it is of prototype size. So all sub-blends, I would use a number 1 in that third slot.
Ah, okay.
So I know that those are sub-blends and these are of prototype
so
volume.
you've stepped it up a degree.
Yeah, so basically if it's 2, I know it's the first round of prototypes.
Okay.
The next one would have a 3, and so on as numbers go. So first thing I do is I get it on the nose, and my little grid has nose relative strength. And on this I have grain, cask, ester, and other. And then I rank those 1 to 5.
Okay.
Or you could say low to high. You could do the way the deductive tasting grid for sommeliers goes, is they go low, medium minus, medium plus, high.
I'm with you.
So it's basically 1 through 5. So if I'm running through this, I'm trying to do it at a pretty fast pace. I usually set a timer that's about 5 minutes per sample. But I usually run over a bit, but it's just to remind.
We're familiar.
It's basically just to remind me that time exists. It's like a little bit of a clock, so I'm not just lounging in my little tasting cubicle. But anyways, nose relative strength, I get it really quickly. So just clicking through it, I feel like it's defined by ester and other.
Okay.
And this is an interesting crossover because it's beer. So some of the beers bring some fruit notes too. So there's a little bit of competing. So ester, other, and then probably grain and cask leading behind. So right now I have, grain at a 3, cask at a 2, other at a 3, ester at a 4.
Okay. And as you said on this scale, so that's a 4 essentially out of 5.
Yeah, and so it's remembering it's all relative.
Yep.
So they're all relative to each other. So it doesn't necessarily I could put them all at 5. And that would mean that they're expressing themselves in the same way.
Okay, relative to each other is important.
Difference. So I'll know if something's a 1 and something's a 5, you'll know that there's a big gap between those two. And then I just sort of rattle off some notes and really not try to overthink it too much. So straight off, it's like melon rind. We got a little bit of wheat bread, toasted wheat bread, maybe just a tiniest bit of honey on that wheat bread. Mm-hmm. Maybe a fresh apple. That's easy. And then I go to the palate. And I'm always expectorating. Expect to expectorate. And so I've said this the other day to you, where I think the most important part of tasting a whiskey, your most important position, is when you're just tilting the glass back between your nose right before it hits the palate.
Yeah.
This is this I described it as the space between the spaces.
Exactly,
Or like
yeah.
the sort of interstitial zone between nose and palate that can combine the both of them. And so it obviously is connecting the two, but it's also letting you almost taste it in two different ways, coming in through the nose, in through the mouth at the same time, right before it hits the palate. And is there continuity? I think there's pretty good continuity in this one. I think the melon carries over, that ester is strong, as expected. Once it got on my palate, the cask picks up, because that's when those cask notes come through, those darker chocolates, those interesting baking spices will come through on the palate. That's always expected, that ester will be higher on the nose, cask will be higher on the palate. For me, really nice texture on this one.
I'm loving that interstitial space you're talking about, that tilting the glass and experiencing what's in the glass through nose and mouth before it hits palate. That is so exciting.
Yeah, it's also one of those spaces that you're thinking less, you know? So you're not too deep in, like, sometimes you can get hung up on, I got this on the nose, I'm really trying to like think of particular notes. And I don't want to get hung up on, if you're trying to think of something, you're not going to think of it. A lot
Sure,
of times, like,
of course.
I know that, I know what it is, I know what it is. But I find that in between moment to be a moment of not really thinking about it, and then notes will strike you about it. And that's what I enjoy. I mean, sometimes when I'm tasting and I'm overthinking it, I sort of try to get my mind to wander a bit or think about something else and keep the glass close by. And then it'll strike you.
Yeah, so sometimes I'll find if we've run through notes, it's then in returning to it when the pressure of the blank page has been removed, and then you return to the spirit. Now a few more ideas are flowing because you're not staring at the blank page. Yeah,
I mean, it's interesting. Even not to get too reflective about it, but
reflective gold.
Yeah. Not to get too reflective gold about it. It's like even this moment, like I'm talking.
Yeah.
As I'm doing it, which is a distraction. I'm sitting in a different place. That's not my cubicle by myself. Like that's a distraction. So I'm definitely not going to make a decision in this moment. Make a decision, in that other space.
And yet it feels a little bit like how you may enjoy it with a friend, right? If someone comes over, this is how I would be engaging with this liquid, would be chatting to a friend, bringing it up, and having that experience of when that's in the vicinity of my face, I'm enjoying it while chatting with somebody.
Exactly. Like it can be twofold. Like I'm not always going to make a decision like that, but if something's really striking, it's going to strike. It's going to strike you when you're distracted. So it'll tell you something there.
I do think that's excellent.
Yeah, I think this is a really good start. I mean, considering this is prototype A, I think it's a really good start. Got a nice little black pepper thing going on. There's continuity from the nose to the palate. Yeah, it's pretty engaging.
Yep.
I would say.
The malt is clear right through the experience, which is one of the things I liked about the first iteration of the beer cask finish, was that you knew what it was. And what it was also delicious. I like that connective tissue.
Yeah, this is the interesting thing, especially with batch 1, was that it's called beer cask finish, but you want it to be kind of like structurally like a beer, but not taste like a beer. Because if it tastes like a beer, it's not very good. It doesn't have a lot of staying power. It doesn't have that drinkability, like you're saying. So I like to have these it has quick peaks and valleys between the notes, and it doesn't have like a hop signature. Hops are one thing that are kind of hard to deal with if they come through too much.
Sure.
Because they turn to soap. Sort of in the whiskey. So that was a big thing to deal with, and to balance these different beer styles that we're working with in different brewers.
Can you give us a ballpark on the beer styles that would have gone into B32A?
So it's got. I have my whole spreadsheet that'll tell me exactly what went into it. So this was built with prototypes A or sub blends A through E.
Okay.
So if I have all those.
Even I just checked the shelf for, okay, sub-blends is the second shelf down. You've gone from beer samples to sub-blends, yep, before we get to prototypes, which we've just tasted just now. So, okay, back to your sub-blends.
Yeah, so this was kind of like, this one in particular is interesting because it's kind of like an all-in. I'm using all the sub-blends. And then other ones, so I'll know like, oh, what it's like when they're all mixed together, and then I'm removing one or removing others, so like I have a comparison as I go through.
Interesting.
So we got porter, stouts, we got saison, we have a Brett saison, we have a Belgian quad. This has some barley wine. I know like strict definition beer doesn't have, but it has some barley wine. Doppelbock. Yeah, that's what we're working with.
Wow, fantastic.
Yeah, and
that's
one of the
answer. Thank you, sir.
Well, yeah, one of the saison also used a peated cask. So we filled it with peated spirit. We dumped that and then gave it to a brewer who then used it to make a saison to try to get sort of a smoke character. So that's a question mark here. I was like, oh, will the peat come through after that journey?
Interesting.
Not quite in the first sample.
No.
We'll see if it gets turned up in different ones.
Would you, after going through that first prototype, would you ever score that out of 5 to know where you stand on the overall experience, or right now are you sitting in individual zones?
Yeah, so the end of my grid, so once I've gone through nose relative strength, I've done a couple nose notes, I've done my palate relative strength, a couple palate notes, I have the question of, is it release ready? And so for that, I have 5 options. There's yes, like, okay, 100%, let's go. And then there's yes with minor revision, so just need to change, something small. Yes with major revision.
Okay.
And then there's no, find alternative destination, which means like this shouldn't even be this release. Like that's a kind of a rare one to just be like, this isn't going to work at all. Like there's so much wrong with it. And then there's just your plain no.
Okay.
So the major minor thing is it's kind of funny. My partner Reeves, as I call her, she got a PhD program, and part of it obviously you're writing for journals and submitting them, and some of them were a rejection with minor revision and a rejection with major revision. And I was like, oh, that's good. I'm going to use that, because that's how, like, it's true. Sometimes you're like, oh yeah, that's good, but like there's a little something off, and it's not a full rejection. Yeah.
So where is your mind on that, if you're okay revealing that?
Yeah, I would throw this as a yes. So what that means now in the first round of prototypes is that I'll probably focus in on that profile and make some tweaks to it.
Okay.
And then start to hone in.
Okay.
So like that's a yes, but it's a yes within a first round. So then I liked that framework, and I'll probably play with the ratios a bit. And then I'll taste again in a set of probably 3 prototypes that are really more tightly banded, like they don't have big differences, or they shouldn't have big differences. Yeah. And then maybe I'll end up selecting that one. So the part of the idea of the structure too is it becomes an editing process. Like you start with you start with a big morass of something, and then you start to edit it down, and it gets tighter and tighter to what the final version is going to be. Mm-hmm. And so I know when I'm tasting my last 3, like theoretically they all should be good enough to be final whiskeys. Yeah. I'm just going to make that call at the end, but it also leaves it open to something like this. I'll keep this in there as it exists in its own structure to be like, sometimes it comes together fast, Mm-hmm. And I have to be open to that. I have to be open to it coming together fast and also it taking a while. And I think this system works well for that.
Have you had that frustrating moment in blending when you've come really close to the end point? You've thought, well, it just needs a little bit of, for example, stout cask, and you've added the stout cask, and it has changed what you're dealing with? Or do you know your cask well enough at this point that you've still got a sense of where it would take you?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. There's definitely a sweet spot of frustration and and like relief that it worked out. Like there's been plenty of times where I'm going and I'm just like, I don't know, I'm really not sure about this. Like there was something that I liked, but I'm still not sure about it. And it's like, do a couple rounds of prototypes, and then if it doesn't strike me, then I'm fine with, taking it back to the beginning. Like you said, if I can add a little bit of this stout cask, it's like, what's the evidence? I should have had enough combinations to tell me, to give me evidence that would work.
Yeah, that makes sense in listening to you. Okay, how about this? For number 2 here, number 2 prototype, how about I sit back and you lead us through without me interrupting you?
Okay, sounds good.
And to be clear for the listeners, Shane is pouring this sample right now. He's doing his rinse that he talked about a moment ago. He is typing at his keyboard in his lab as he's going through this experience. We are sitting in the front row of Shane's regular job here, and it's fascinating and exciting. So cheers, mate, for having us in the lab.
Yeah, I appreciate it. It's interesting to narrate it, to be honest.
Okay, I'm sitting back now. The spotlight is on you. Set your timer. Narrate for the listeners.
All right, so anticipated release name. This is going to be my beer vatting. I'm tasting and vatting. This is sample code B32.B. All right, nose relative strength. So defined in a somewhat similar way to the other one. I think actually Cask is ramped up a bit, competing more with the ester notes, but ester's still largely leading the way. Interesting note, pistachio, which is not, I don't think that's a very common note for me. Pistachio, so this one has a little bit more of a nutty thing. It maintains the melon, probably more of like a honeydew melon. So like let's just call that a tamer melon. Honeydew, a tame melon. It's hanging on to some hop thing, like a citrus hop thing. All right, I'm gonna go palate. Yeah, nice, interesting spike, pretty good spike on the palate. Good acceleration. A little more sweetness than I was expecting from the nose. It's hanging on to the citrus, but the citrus in maybe a sweet way, like maybe a lemon cake or something like that. Maybe a candied orange, maybe one of those like chocolate, even a chocolate orange, like those ones you smash on the counter. Personal favorite. Grain is not coming through quite as much, like the maltiness isn't quite there. Release ready, I think this is, yes, minor revision. I'm gonna taste a couple of the subblends and see where that citrus note is coming from, and maybe swap for a different one that has less of that hop citrus character. Overall notes, super solid, but I just want to shake that citrus hop note. That's basically it. That's me going through a sample.
Fantastic, man. That was rocking. It's so hard not to engage you when you're talking about like chocolate orange and citrus. But I like, in part one, we had talked about that acceleration.
Yeah.
From nose to palate. And that idea that once it hits your mouth, the rest of the experience is making sense. And I've really kind of sat with that. You've given me, you've given the listeners plenty to think about. In the interest of time, and I know you've got more prototypes to get to, in terms of your process here, how far are you from completing this iteration? How long do you still have available to you?
Oh, I have an incredible amount of time. So for this one, like pretty far in advance, we still have batch 2,
Yeah.
beer edition 2. Got vatted somewhat recently and bottled somewhat recently. So the way we're doing these ones in particular, so beer cask finish and wine cask finish, I'm calling them batches.
Yes.
Which is for us, is different from editions.
Okay.
So editions is something that comes out every year, like a Gariana.
Understood.
That'll come out every year. These batches are around till they're gone. So like batch 1 is around, until it's gone, until we sell it out. And then batch 2 is around, and then batch 3 comes in. So it's not a set time, but I would imagine we're, 8 months out maybe, or 6 months. Then from it needing to let's put this in ball, let's be done.
For it to be sold, but then how long before you finalize?
Me personally, I'll finalize this within a month, probably less, based on the first prototype that we just tasted. I have a lot of confidence. I'm a little bit surprised. I feel like it fits well. And then we'll see once I hit, like whichever one of these ones, these coated samples is the batch 2 iteration. We'll see how much variability there is, but I'm pretty confident right now that it came together. Like I'll do a couple rounds of prototype just to dial it in and just to have sampled enough so I feel confident in my decision.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
And then on the labeling, does it have a B1? Does it have a batch 1? Is it an L code? Like, is it clear that
it's clear.
These are batched?
Yeah, it'll say batch 1, batch 2.
Okay. Well, dear listeners, please search out your batch 1s and your batch 2s, but know that you just listened to the early days of batch 3 in the second part of today's episode. Shane, I honestly can't thank you enough. This has been such a treat and such an invitation, both into your lab and into your process. So, sincere thanks.
I appreciate doing the podcast. I'm a fan.
Cheers, man.
Like you guys have been doing it for a while. And you do a good job at it.
Oh gosh, well, I wasn't fishing, but thank you so much.
Yeah.
That means a lot to us. Well, I know we'll continue to speak all the way through 25, but thanks so much for having me on this visit. It's been a real pleasure.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Cheers.
Huge thanks to Shane, Showtime, Armstrong, and of course to our very own Jason Neal, Patrick Harris, Johnston Yellen. What a great listen to those two, and to hear Jason with Shane out there in the rackhouse, warehouse, with them tasting through a bunch of single casks, and then having them in the sensory room, going through the whiskeys there, just to be a fly on the wall, to hear Shane's process was really fantastic. And hopefully it gave you all a bit of a sense of what they go through to put their whiskeys together. So again, huge thanks to Jason to bring this to everybody. As always, listeners, we thank you for tuning in, for downloading, for spreading the good word about the Podcast, One Nation Under Whiskey. If you've enjoyed today's episode, please go to wherever you listen to that, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever it is, and give us a 5-star rating. We would truly appreciate that. And if they allow you to give a comment, please do that, and we'll look out for them. And if we see the comment, we'll read it here on the podcast. And if you have any questions, you can send them in to info@singlecastnation.com. Thanks as always to our listeners and of course to our viewers. Just a reminder here that our extra episodes, the episodes that happen every other Wednesday when we're not doing our interviews. We don't just post them here in the podcast in the audio space, but we also post them on our YouTube channels. So you can go check that out. youtube.com/SinglecastNation, I think is the URL, but you can go check that out. Until next time, dear listeners, we bid you adieu and we say cheers. Thank you.